Hi, everybody, and welcome to the session. We will be talking about the need and possible solutions for strong authentication for crypto wallets, as well as in general blockchain transaction scenarios. I'm Megan Shamus. You've seen me today. Of course, I'm with the FIDO Alliance. I've brought in two authentication and cryptocurrency experts to chat with me today on this topic. We have Bojan Simic, who is the CEO and CTO of HYPR, who you may know as a FIDO board member and one of the leading passwordless solution provider in the space. And Nick Steele, who you recognize from Duo and Gemini, who's been a lead contributor to W3C, the Web Authn and FIDO specs, and is now the lead researcher at SuperLunar, which is a research group that Gemini has spun off. So let me just take a moment and let Nick and Bojan introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the chat.
Thanks. And thanks, Megan. I am Nick Steele. I've been working in the identity standard space for a little while now, and I've given a few FIDO talks, but more recently I've been focused on cryptocurrency research and really blockchain research in general, not so much focused on the currency, but really the identity around keys that are being used to identify people or organizations across different ledgers. So the identity aspect is still something that's in hot debate, especially on several different types of blockchains, which we can get into. But that's where my focus has been over the past few months, and that's where a lot of my team's research has led. And so now I'm managing a team of 4 great research engineers over at SuperLunar that are focused on broad aspects of R&D within the protocol space.
Awesome. Bojan Simic here, as Megan said, co-founder, CEO, and CTO of HYPR. I live here in New York City. I first got into the crypto space, as we call it today, back in 2012, 2013, after my wife joined a Bitcoin exchange called BitInstant in New York City. And I have a cybersecurity background, but I got into that space mostly from an academic perspective because I love everything applied cryptography related. And in 2014 timeframe, I co-founded HYPR in New York City, as I mentioned, and we since then have been working on eliminating passwords and asymmetric cryptography. A lot of the same concepts that are in FIDO and modern authentication standards are very applicable to the blockchain space. So I've been keeping tabs and staying involved as best I can. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So Bojan, Nick, can you so our audience has varying education around crypto authentication and blockchain. Can you just give us your perspectives on what is the sort of current state of play in terms of what's being used for authentication for these transactions and to secure these wallets?
Sure, so I'll kick that off. And so most people that are involved in any sort of crypto today, which typically happens after there is a price spike in Bitcoin, and then all my uncles call me and say, how do I get into this? That's typically how it works. And so, they go and set up their wallets on their exchange of choice, whether it's, Coinbase, Gemini, Abra, those types of places, crypto.com with Matt Damon doing their commercials. And then they buy some Bitcoin and they set up typically a very insecure password. My uncle's password is my grandmother's name and the year she was born. And so I know because I helped him set up his crypto account and that's what he put in. And then, they'll be set up, or then they'll set up something like a 2FA code if the exchange requires it. And they will usually opt in for a very much phishable MFA factor like an SMS code because it's just easier. It's what they use with their bank and it's what's familiar to them. And so a lot of the crypto exchanges typically do provide authentication methods that are far stronger than those phishable methods, but most people typically don't use them because it's not familiar to them. And I think that's some of the stuff we'll need to change, and we can talk about that. Then there are other types of crypto wallets, which typically don't rely on a centralized store of people's cryptocurrency, that use things like a seed, which is typically a set of 12 words that are used to generate the private keys for people's wallets. And those have become, increasingly phishable, and individuals are basically just required to maintain those on their own, usually print them out or write them down or put them inside a password manager or whatever else, email them to themselves, which then kind of defeats the purpose. But those are the two primary methods. And the bad news is most of those still have phishable capabilities, even though sometimes non-phishable factors are available.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard in the space right now where, you're starting to see a lot of the same problems that kind of set the scene for the need for FIDO2 years ago, where, it's like account recovery is a huge issue. Dealing with syncing your credentials. So what Bojan was talking about by, managing your 12-word seed phrase by printing it out or emailing it to yourself are the kind of issues, that we saw in, I think, the two-factor space and MFA space years ago. And there's a lot of room for improvement currently for managing aspects of authentication with your hardware wallets. I mean, the blockchains and that most people use, like the Ethereum blockchain or the Bitcoin blockchain, the concept of having an identity attached to these chains is pretty loose, but it's also, it is based in that applied cryptography aspect of, an identity is just a credential key. So being able to secure these credential keys without using a provider, but to use it in a pure decentralized fashion, which is kind of the ethos of the blockchain right now, which is we should be decentralizing all these aspects of infrastructure, is still a really difficult process, and a lot of people kind of use the word Web3 to define these decentralized terms. So when you hear about Web3 browsers or Web3 internet. Generally, what people mean when they're talking about this is, we're able to query and transact on the blockchain through the browser, which is something that's still really, really hard to do. And there's nothing native. There's no native support for this. This is an area that would be great for the standard space. But I don't think we're anywhere near Web3 yet. We're closer towards maybe Web 2.5, and it's a really kind of disjointed Frankenstein-y experience right now of things that are still centralized and things that are decentralized, and still and then in these spaces you have these exchanges, these cryptocurrency exchanges, which have to sort of be these arbiters or mediators for access to the blockchain, and through that they're basically a financial provider, so they have to have KYC, they have to handle identity, they have to handle all these forms of authentication in order to protect their users, because the minute these exchanges get hacked in any way, it's kind of the game over for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we see the blockchain technology itself is meant to be decentralized in almost every way, and then we see a lot of service providers kind of wrapping that technology and then securing it by using a legacy method. And I was watching YouTube on a flight yesterday, and there was this guy that buys Teslas. He buys Teslas, and then he rips them apart and he puts a gas engine in it and drives it around. And it reminds me of that's basically what we're doing when we see a blockchain technology put SMS in front of account security. It makes zero sense, but there's still people doing it.
All right, so I want to touch on a few things that you said there. The first one was that the crypto exchanges are requiring MFA. So I assume that that's the case across the board. So just wanted to clarify that. But the second one was, you mentioned that your uncle, for example, chose SMS OTP as the MFA of choice. And I totally get that, because that's what folks are used to. But is there a user experience or educational hurdle there that needs to be overcome in order for folks to choose the unphishable MFA options? Nick, and I know that you can touch on this because Gemini has rolled out FIDO2 and supports security keys as well as platform authenticators, and maybe you might have some anecdotes around the adoption there.
For sure. I mean, to touch on the MFA side of things, it really is crucial for these exchanges to support MFA and it, I mean, to a certain extent, incentivize users to do this, because this is one of the most common as Bojan mentioned, one of the most common forms of attacks in this space is like leveraging these weak passwords to get into exchanges and then get large amounts of money. And it's really easy for attackers to do this right now because it's a really compelling target. These accounts that it's worth spending the resources to do credential stuffing, to do the phishing, to go out on these Discord channels, which is Discord is kind of this Slack Slack-like service where folks go to talk about cryptocurrency a lot of the time. It's huge in these crypto communities, and people will come in and send direct messages and tons of spam out into these channels, trying to get people to click links and then phish their accounts, because the payoff can be tens of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars sometimes. And it's still it's something that people were struggling with in the space in just the traditional financial space years ago, and now we're just seeing this again. So it's like if exchanges are allowing users to hold all this money, then when they get potentially when money gets potentially withdrawn from their account by an attacker, this is really bad news for the exchange as well, because generally we've gone back into this sort of like FUD cycle of these users got phished, and that means that the platform itself is insecure. Well, it's like, no, it's because the passwords are insecure. So these exchanges are really trying to do the best they can to get users onto FIDO2, because that's going to give us the highest grade of authentication security in the space. So Gemini was one of the first exchanges to offer only FIDO2 login. So if users are able to add 2 credentials, could be 2 platform authenticators, or it could be any combo, but you can just move entirely over to FIDO2 authentication, and you don't have to use OTP. You don't have to use any email, any other channels. And this was like a very early decision on our end to keep our users safe, especially because Gemini has traditionally a very older user base, and we're able to really help protect those older users that are really they're interested in the cryptocurrency space, but they're also may not be as technically savvy as some of the younger audiences that use maybe Coinbase or FTX. So we do a really big job of basically getting users to onboard and then move to FIDO2 as quickly as possible to protect their assets.
Yeah, so that's an interesting concept, because one of my friends a couple years ago, his phone got SIM jacked, and so which means somebody walked into a Verizon store and they had a fake ID or somehow fooled the person in the store to issue a new phone with the same phone number as my friend's to the hacker, and that hacker then used the SMS and guessed his password to get into his bank account. And the person went in there and stole some money out of his bank account. And my friend went to the bank and said, "This happened to me. It sucks. And here's the video screenshot from the Verizon store where this person stole my account." And the bank was like, "Oh, sorry that happened to you. Here's all your money back." That happened. And he was unhappy with the whole situation, sure, but he financially he did not suffer in any major way. And that doesn't happen with cryptocurrency because there's typically very little protection of that sort. I think it's starting to change a little bit, which is okay. But today that is still a big issue. And so for as long as that's the case, kind of still providing the phishable MFA and legacy MFA as options are going to be a big deal. And truthfully, in terms of the mass market adoption of FIDO and non-phishable factors, I think until services, like Facebook, major social media things that we use every single day kind of just make it the norm, that, this will prevail. Because until my uncle is able to say like, oh, I log into this thing like I log into my Facebook, like it's not going to change in a major way. And that is happening incrementally, but not at the rate it needs to, obviously. And for those organizations to make that a requirement, there is a education that needs to happen, but it has to happen, because I remember like 3 years ago, everybody hated QR codes, scanning QR codes. Now everybody scans QR codes for everything because there was a global pandemic and you couldn't order food if you didn't. And so I think if a similar push happened, across the board, where people just kind of learn as they go and kind of have to rip off that Band-Aid, I think we could save years of heartache for a lot of people.
Yeah, I kind of always say that when it comes to like leveraging your on-device platform authenticator, so like your on-device biometric to log in, like say on your PC, is a little new to a lot of folks, but once they do it at their bank and then they go to their crypto exchange and it's the same thing, they're like, oh, well, I do that at my bank. So that's, and it's the learning curve actually is, I think, much shorter than people think. But it's really just a matter of like getting it out there and getting people using it. And it's very similar to like anytime we introduce like a new technology, it seems so like, oh, the consumers it's going to be so arduous for the consumer. But in reality, they do it once or twice and then they go about their day, right? I think it's about like the not adding too much friction there. Like if you're adding a lot of friction, that could be a problem. But in the case of FIDO, it just isn't. So.
It's funny you mentioned friction. I was talking with one of my UX researchers on the Gemini side, and it's interesting that I think friction, especially in the finance space, kind of adds. It's a weird switch from, I guess, other industries where adding a little friction actually makes users feel a little more secure, and being able to add. I mean, I feel like we have a pretty seamless login process for most of the time, hopefully. But then when we talk about security and adding that FIDO2 layer and adding that MFA layer, I think we do a pretty or we try to do a pretty good job of telling the user why this is necessary and why they should be doing it up front. So when you log into Gemini the first time, you're actually required to log in with SMS OTP. And from there, we actually, try to really compel the user to step up to the next level of like, to using push with Authn, to using a security token. And the hope is, eventually we can just move into this space. Maybe we do get to this point where, like Bojan was talking about, where it is like a Facebook experience. You could actually use these crypto exchanges or go to, you could go to another website and access your crypto exchange through that site, similar to how OAuth would work with Facebook currently. So you could log in with Gemini or log in with Coinbase on another site. I believe Coinbase already supports this actually, and it's a really interesting feature. But I mean, part of with that comes other responsibilities. But this is kind of like this Web 2.5 stance that we've been talking about, where it's like there isn't a great way to access, potentially your cryptocurrency or just the blockchain at large through the browser. So you have to use these exchanges as mediators. So being able, I could potentially set up a a phishing site that uses, log in with Coinbase, and then attempt to get into the user's account that way. And this is something that is kind of necessary now, but differs from, say, how traditional banking would do it, which, they wouldn't. They have no reason to do it. They have access to traditional financial systems.
I wanted to ask, we've been talking a lot about crypto exchanges. I know a lot of us saw, so now we have other kinds of transactions happening on the blockchain, like NFTs, for example, and there's these NFT marketplaces. And I think a lot of us saw that there was, some, whether it was a phishing attack or some sort of attack where folks had their NFTs stolen. I just wanted to ask, those marketplaces, like where do you see them at in terms of authentication, and like where would you like to see them?
For me, it's like the Wild West all over again with Bitcoin a few years ago. It was just, it's been fascinating to watch, but the Web3 concept, they primarily still depend on those kind of 12-word seeds to do transactions. And I've seen some, do an out-of-band approval of, transactions to your phone if you're using a laptop or desktop browser, which is really cool, really interesting concept. And ultimately, I do think that, the technology certainly has merit and it will grow significantly. But one thing I've noticed is, and this is just my opinion and of the overall identity ecosystem, if we look at the concept of identity security, nothing has been done in identity security that has stuck, that has not had a open standard associated with it. And then, so if we're looking to do identity association, identity security, any sort of assurance within the Web3 world, standards need to play a major part in it. Otherwise, we're just going to be, stepping on a rake over and over, over the next few years, as this space continues to rapidly grow.
And that's a really great point. This space is really, really ripe for standardization at this point. There's a lot of competing narratives in how we should be doing things and how we should be even integrating or interfacing with the browser, to how we standardize the protocols between the hardware authenticator and the like a website accessing it. And there's since there's not a lot of this browser support right now, you have applications like MetaMask or Kepler, or these browser extensions, which really are trying to inject the JavaScript and code necessary to talk to the blockchain into the browser. And these libraries really are, they're not managed by like a committee or anyone, and you kind of end up with legacy code in there, or different ways to access the same primitives, and it ends up being a really hard developer process. So being able to standardize these tools would really help developers come into the space and do a better job of getting started in what you could call Web3. But I think that this is kind of an area where, I would say the W3C could do really well, where FIDO could do really well to help on the more authentication aspects of how these wallets can, be authenticated. But I think there is a aversion from these groups, and we've seen it in the past. Not so much from FIDO, but from the W3C around getting into the space, because I think there's still a lot of fear and uncertainty, and also, like a fair amount of snake oil on the blockchain side that kind of prevent people from really seeing, the more infrastructure value that I feel like I've seen on the research side. So there is still some work in the space. The Web3 Foundation, DIF, the Decentralized Identity Foundation. There's a few groups in the space already that are trying to standardize, but I don't think they have the maturity of a lot of the more traditional web organizations. in terms of like, you know, the bureaucracy and the structure and how they go around doing things. Even getting additions made to Ethereum through what they call EIPs, the Ethereum Improvement Proposals, is not a standardized process. So when the Ethereum blockchain wants to be updated, developers are asked to put forward an EIP, and there's no standardization around these EIPs and how you go around updating the blockchain. You literally need to push your EIP out the door and onto the system. But there's some that have, you know, sat there and stagnated in sort of like the proposal space for years, and nothing comes of them because they don't go through a charter process. They don't go through a goal oriented plan. They just get put out there and then sort of fall off. So there's a lot of room in the space for standardization and standards bodies to kind of come in and help really add this a better level of maturity to the space.
Agreed.
Bojan, I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. You know, like, you know, I was just thinking, you know, we really need to secure the way that people buy JPEGs for millions of dollars.
Well, thanks so much, Nick and Bojan. I feel like we kind of just scratched the surface, but this has been super enlightening. I hope it has been for our audience as well, not only on the current state of play for strong authentication for crypto wallets and blockchain, but also like where standardization is necessary. And I hope that might spur some thoughts from you all. In the nature of that, we can move to some live Q&A now.